Ready for our chat. So we had a great response from last week. It was fantastic. We had over 1,000 people viewed the last video, which was great. So we must be doing something a little bit right.
And
we've had
that message out.
Get the message out. And I think, you know, the whole, just to reiterate why, you know, why we're doing these Facebook Lives is because we've known this information for a very, very, very long time.
Yes. Yes.
We have been shouting from whatever rooftop we can possibly get to in front of as many people in terms of teachers and parents to share this information with them, because it's very frustrating, isn't it, when we see people struggling, and if they knew this,
absolutely,
really it could make their lives so much easier.
Oh, completely. And I know, you know, as a teacher, I knew a little bit of it, but I learnt more after I retired, sadly. And I just think the difference I could have made if I'd really known this right back, you know, 40 years ago, because it is phenomenal. It's a different way of thinking, a different way of coaching people, just a different way of looking at, you know, learning disabilities.
I think it'd be really useful just to share a little bit about your experience as a head teacher. And maybe some of the things that you tried before you retired.
Okay, right. Well, where do I start? And it's always been a difficult thinking about children in your class who are not reading and spelling, because if they can't read and spell, then it's so difficult to engage with the rest of the curriculum. And throughout my career, there have been various methods and ideas and strategies thrown at us, really, and sometimes very few strategies thrown at us, because often it's, well, if they're not getting it by what I'm doing, because I'm doing what I've been trained to do, what I'm supposed to be doing, then there's something wrong with the child. So it's been very much, if you can't get it our way, well, there's something wrong with you. And then they call it the kind of pathologization or pathology of learning differences. So you were kind of, oh, well, there's nothing, well, and then it's almost, well, we need something, a special needs person, or they need to have that sort of intervention. So there were very few tools really for a classroom teacher. And I remember way back, spelling was considered to be not that important. The important thing was the creativity and the flow. And so often we used to say to parents, oh, don't worry about that, you know, it's not important, they'll pick it up, or what. We really didn't have the language to talk about these difficulties, and we certainly didn't have the tools to cope with them. I think many teachers have always done phonics in some way, shape or form, and that worked for many children. Some people use the kind of just look and say method, or the apprenticeship way of learning to read, you know, where you just pick it up by following what somebody else. There have been lots of different ways of dealing with these difficulties over the years. But as I say, not really getting to grips with what is it all about with a real understanding. Anyway, fast forwarding to about the 1990s, I came across neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, and Robert Dilts, sort of dyslexic himself, created the NLP spelling strategy, which was a visual strategy. And that, I thought, oh, okay, maybe this is something.
And just to explain a little bit about NLP, excuse me, this always happens as soon as I start talking a line, I start coughing. It's okay, folks, I'm all right, I'm fine. But NLP is about modeling excellence.
Yes.
And that's what Robert Dilts did, was he took the whole modeling process. And modeling is not just external behaviors, it's what are people doing, actually more, what are people doing internally inside their minds. And when he modeled good spellers, people who were excellent at spelling, he discovered that essentially most good spellers are doing pretty much the same thing. They've got the same strategy internally, the same method inside their mind. Whereas people who were either poor at spelling or actually had some sort of, you know, label like dyslexia or whatever, were all doing something completely different, not just from good spellers, but actually from each other as well. So there was a very clear understanding then that actually to be able to spell well, you have to be able to see words inside your mind's eye. That was really, really clear.
Yeah, and for me, that was a real, I mean, it wasn't a light bulb moment. It was kind of firework night and volcanoes and, you know, explosion moment, because I thought, okay, I've been teaching and I've been trying to, and I was trained in the child-centered approach, but I've been trying to sort of go with the child and what are their needs, what are their interests, and sort of finding out how they learn best. But I hadn't really thought about, well, how are they really processing the information? What's going on inside their brains? That hadn't occurred to me. And of course, what I was seeing as a teacher was these often very, very bright children, incredibly bright, creative, great thinkers. They could tell you everything about every dinosaur that ever existed. They could make models, they could paint, and they couldn't read and write. And so you're thinking, what is going on here as a teacher? And I hate not being able to solve a problem. You know, I'm kind of like a Rottweiler with a bone. You know, I need to get some answers. And so I've always been willing to try and, I don't know, think outside the box and be a little bit more daring and in what I did. And of course, when I was a teacher, you know, you have got a bit of autonomy in your classroom and you can try these things out. So I started to try Diltz's spelling strategy out. Then I came across a lady called Cricket Kemp who did magical spelling. And again, finding a way to help people who were really struggling with their reading and their spelling to learn. And it was pretty successful. And when I was a head teacher, I introduced that into the school. We also did things like coloured overlays and thought about the colours that we were using and the fonts we were using and the size and the worksheets, everything that we did. And also thinking very much, and it links into what we do, what are their strengths? You know, I refuse to see anybody as being learning disabled. You know, it's not a disability, it's a difference. And look at these amazing things that these people can do. And how can we really tap into that and build on those strengths? So for me, fostering self-esteem was always at the heart of everything that we did, even though I knew that we didn't really have the tools. We were known as a dyslexia-friendly school, but if I put my hand on my heart, you know, we weren't really solving the problem, basically. So, and then after I retired, I met a lovely lady called Olive Hickmott, and she kind of fitted in the missing link to the puzzle, and this system just makes absolute sense to me now.
Yeah, and Olive herself is dyslexic.
Yes.
You know, and I think it's just an absolutely remarkable achievement that, and it's probably quite typical of someone who is dyslexic to be able to see things from a completely different perspective.
Absolutely.
Think differently about a problem, to see it from a totally different angle. Yeah. And whilst Robert Diltz's spelling strategy was absolutely spot on in terms of what good spellers need to be able to do, this ability to look up, to see the word inside their mind's eye, etc. Really, her missing, what she filled in was this missing piece beforehand, which is actually identifying, well, what is someone's mental imagery like before you even come across words. So, you know, with the best will in the world, the NLP spelling strategy might work for a lot of people whose mental imagery is okay anyway. It's under control, it's well developed. It's just a matter of, oh, I have to use it for words. Okay, I get it. And then you start, you know, developing that skill and practicing it until it becomes automatic. But for many, many other students, because their mental imagery is all over the place, either they're not using it for words or for numbers, or because it's just haywire. You know, there's too much information, things are moving, you know, they're reversing, all that kind of stuff. So Olive's genius really was, you know, to be able to take that step back beforehand and establish mental imagery really, and then the grounding and everything else that comes into that. So it's been it was just incredible, because you met her separately from me, and then, you know,
yes, that's right.
And she kept saying to me, you must meet Paula. And you know, I was like, oh, you know, I've got enough people to deal with, you know. And yet, you know, really it was absolutely fantastic that we did meet.
That's right. And I was so excited. Of course, I thought I was going to go out there and transform education overnight, you know, because this was this amazing system, and I could and I started taking private clients, and I just tested out with various young people and well, adults as well, and started working with people individually because I was already retired by then, and then sort of phoning up colleagues and saying, oh, can I come into your school and try this out? Yes. And got fantastic results, absolutely amazing. And I thought, well, this is going to transform things. And you know, we're now kind of, haven't been retired 9 years now, 9 years? No, we can't somehow, I don't know why, we're just not breaking through into the educational establishment. But anyway, that's another story, so we'll park that one.
So I'm going to see if I can share my screen.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that that this is okay. This is visible. I won't know for a moment until we have a look. Let me see. Yes, it's working.
Oh, so fantastic.
Yeah.
I really admire your ability with this technology. Good job I'm not doing this.
Well, we're a great team, Paula. We're a great team. That's always the key. So yeah, exactly as you were saying there, which was about focusing on the strengths of children rather than on their weakness. And this diagram was one that popped into my head, because we were saying, well, how do we communicate this to teachers, to head teachers, to, you know, special education teachers? How do we communicate this in a way that can really help them to understand, why is this different? What is really the fundamental difference between this and, you know, maybe some of the other interventions, which they may work, but they probably take a lot longer, if at all. You know, sometimes they don't work at all. I've had lots of students who have had help all the way through primary school, would be in secondary school. Then they come to me because they didn't know I existed beforehand. And, you know, the parents are going, well, why didn't they get this help before? And I go, well, because the school just didn't know. And I think,
just,
you know,
don't know about it. Absolutely. And it's amazing, because people do think that you know what the answer is. And so parents would come to me and say, I've got a diagnosis, if you like, or an assessment of dyslexia. My child is dyslexic. So now, and expecting me to say, oh, okay, now you've got the label. Oh, right, okay, I can pull something out of the bag that I hadn't done before. But obviously, whenever you see a child struggling in class, you're trying to do the best you possibly can for that child. Having a label doesn't necessarily, well, it certainly doesn't give you any more information, really.
I know. Yeah.
It's so hard, and there's no magic wand in that sense, and it's so frustrating when you see these really you know, very gifted, you know, talented young people, and then they're told that they've got a learning disability, and then of course that feeds in, doesn't it? Oh, there's something wrong with me, you know, I'm different. And
sometimes, I mean, we have a whole you know, we've got a pros and cons of assessment on our website page, you know, where it really is a double-edged sword, because I think sometimes when the label is given, when the assessment's been done and the label has been given, it can act as a relief. Oh,
for sure.
Okay, my child's not lazy, they're not stupid, you know, it's like, oh, okay, now I know what it is. And as you said, sometimes there's an expectation that that the label then gives the solution, but actually it doesn't, it just gives a label.
Yes.
And an understanding that actually this child is thinking and learning differently. And you know, I was lucky enough to present at the Learning Difference Convention in Australia in 2016. I can't believe it's nearly 4 years ago.
Gosh, is that 4 years? Oh my gosh.
And yeah, Lucy's just saying, you know, a lot of teachers feel really overloaded with so many programs, and, you know, and absolutely, and you know that as a teacher and a head teacher.
Oh my goodness, I know. Yes.
Absolutely. But before I went out to Australia, I was asked to you know, engage in some discussions with teachers beforehand to encourage them to come to the talk about this process. And it was very interesting, because actually it was Olive and I had done a webinar, and it was called you know, when phonics isn't enough, how to help the struggling 20%. And a lady in Australia, a teacher in Australia, took great exception to this title for two things. Number one, she said those numbers are ridiculous, there's no way it's 20%. And we know that the normal figure that's given is about 10% of the population will be dyslexic. But the reality is, it's such a wide spectrum. There's it presents so differently for different people. It's not just letter reversals, which is hand on heart. That's what I thought it was at the beginning. I thought it's just people who were reversing B's and D's, P's and Q's, things like that. Some people with dyslexia don't do that at all. They never reverse letters. It presents differently. There's lots and lots of different manifestations of it.
Absolutely.
But we know certainly in Ireland that around 20% of children are still struggling with literacy. And of course, there's lots and lots of complicated reasons why that could be. However, the reality is there's one system really that's being used in school, predominantly phonics, and then any intervention outside of that is still phonics based. Now, of
yes,
course,
I mean, people would say that they're using other strategies like, you know, kinesthetics, and they're using visual, you know, looking at the word, they're looking at the shape of the word, they're you know, using mnemonics, using the rules, the etymology, for example. So people are saying they're doing it, but they're not really looking at.
They're not looking at mental imagery of the child.
Mental imagery, yes, that's right. They're not teaching that underlying skill. Yeah.
And they're not, because it's coaching. It's essentially, rather than, you can't really teach someone to use their mental imagery. You have to find out what's happening and kind of draw it out of them. Anyway, this woman kind of went on a bit of a rant on Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
But what really upset me was that right at the end, she was talking about in Australia they had a lot more autonomy over the class, and I said that's fantastic. And there was a big conversation going back and forth. And then right at the end, you know, she said two things. She said, at the end of the day, phonics is still the best way to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, there's nothing wrong with good old-fashioned hard work.
I remember when you told me, you actually contacted me from Australia, didn't you? You were absolutely boiling when you
I think it took about 2 days, really. It was just before I went out. It was just before I went. Yeah. This conversation came out. But I just said, I can't possibly answer her now because I'll be extremely rude. I'll probably be banned off Facebook for the language I'll be using. Because, you know, anyone who's watching who has a child or who themselves are dyslexic, yes, knows that it's got nothing to do with working harder. In fact, I mean, I've seen families who are practically killing themselves.
Yes.
You know, the kids they not only are struggling at school, they have to really focus and concentrate. It's such hard work to be at school, and then trying to do homework afterwards is such a task and it's such a struggle. They could not be working any harder than they are.
And I think that's
more.
Yeah, and I kind of, but when I speak to you like we're chatting like this, and I still, pictures come into my mind of the little children that I've dealt with in the past, and you know, as a frustrated teacher, that look, come on, just 5 lines before playtime, then you can go out, you know, come on, just focus, I know you can do it, and and I look back and I think, oh my goodness me.
Yes. So, you know, this diagram popped into my head because I was going, well, yes, what are we doing differently? And yes, I suppose that the biggest difference is that we are not predominantly focusing on what are they unable to do, on their disadvantage. Yeah. You know, it's not really about, you know, often when parents bring their children to me, they say, you know, I have the report, do you want to read the report? I go, no, I don't want to read the report. Yeah. Because to be honest, what the report probably won't tell me is actually what they're really, really good at. And I know they can have the profiles done, and often the profiles are very spiky. You know, they've got, you know, especially if you have a child who is twice exceptional, so they're exceptionally good at something and exceptionally bad at reading and spelling, you know, or maths or things like that. So in terms of generally, and it was quite interesting because that year at the conference, an amazing guy called John Fischetti, who I'm not sure if he still is, but he was the director of the University of Newcastle in Sydney. Right. He was the director of the Department of Education, and he was all about the strength asset model as well, which is what we're about, which was about stop looking at what children, you know, when children are tested, it's often to look at, well, what can't they do, you know, what's missing, and then the focus is on that, and then it's kind of, well, let's use the same system that's worked for everybody else for that. And I just had this image of people pushing this huge boulder up a hill and maybe a mountain, really for the rest of their lives, you know, with this label on it, that it's always going to be difficult. And we know from NLP, you know, when we have a language, a word like always, you know, it indicates that there is no other way, that this is going to be something that the person's going to struggle with for the rest of their lives. And yet you have people who are fantastic authors, you know, playwrights, you know, actors, artists, you know, they are so talented in other areas. And it's always that big question mark, well, what's missing? Not in terms of what's wrong with them, but what are they really good at? And can we use what they're good at as a way in? So to me, it was like jumpstarting is like going on a water ride. There's the steps up. There's a bit of work to get to the top of it, which you have to do as a parent or a teacher. You have to work with the child to draw out of them, you know, what are they good at? and to help them understand their own mental imagery. Because unless it's a very, very tiny percent of the population, most people do have mental imagery skills. They just don't realize it. It's very, very unconscious. And once you get to the top of the water slide, they stick them in a rubber ring and off they go by themselves, and learning becomes a flow. It becomes much easier. And we have seen that time and time and time again with the students that we've worked with, and we've heard feedback from the teachers who've been using it and parents who've been using it. But that's the end result, that it becomes much more flowing. And yes, there's a bit of work to set it up, but it saves so much time afterwards.
That's right.
So much time, effort and energy afterwards.
And it's also for, you know, people who maybe not the twice exceptional, you know, because there are many people with dyslexia who maybe haven't got it's a Einstein type skills. So they're just, you know, struggling with their reading and spelling, and they're not particularly sort of outstanding or anything. But it is finding a way that their brain works for them. You know, what are they, what interests it, what can really spark their brain off. I don't know quite what I'm trying to say there. I'm just saying that it's, you don't have to be, you know, twice exceptional.
No. But obviously there are some. I was talking about the profile that sometimes.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
An assessment is a very, very spiky profile.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
But no, not all children are twice exceptional. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, quite often when I ask parents, you know, what's your child good at, they struggle to tell me. Not because the child's not good at anything, but because the focus has really been on what they've been struggling with, and maybe the stuff they're good at is not as obvious, or they just get used to it. They just kind of go, oh yeah, no, they are very good at sport, they are very good at music, but it's just oh yeah, that's just them though. It's not necessarily like, oh wow, that's really great to know. You know, I love it, for example, when a parent tells me, no, I'm not great, although they're really good at horse riding.
Yes, that's true.
Fantastic. If they're great at horse riding, they've already got grounding. They've already got the ability to, you know, they just don't know yet, because that's, you have to be grounded when you're on a horse. I don't mean standing on the ground, I mean it's centered and you know, calm and everything else, otherwise the horse will. So they always find some way of going, oh wow, because if they can do those things, then there's some skill involved in that.
Absolutely, because even if it comes down to, you know, great at baking a cake, or just being a good friend, being kind to somebody, you know, being empathetic, that's a huge set of skills, isn't it? That, and I think often for children, I've seen children, you know, sort of after sort of year 2 in the UK, probably about 6, 7 years old, they've just done their phonics test and they failed it, you know, and they're coming at like age 7 already feeling a failure. And so therefore that, you know, that natural joy of learning, that natural joy of wanting to explore things and have a go at stuff has actually sort of somehow not being developed, because
and
they failed at so many other things. So therefore that's that whole thing, oh, I'm not good at anything, I can't do anything, I'm hopeless.
And that feeds in then, of course, because as soon as you have low self-confidence, there's low self-esteem, you're less willing to try. And I watched a wonderful talk there by Sir Ken Robinson, and he was talking about creativity, and he was saying, you know, creativity is often educated out of us, and it's because we end up with a fear of being wrong and doing things the wrong way. I just want to say something about this diagram, because it looks like we're also talking about the left and right hemisphere as being two, you know, the left hemisphere.
Gosh, yes.
And that's not what we're saying here at all, because that has been debunked by neuroscience, that people are either left brain thinkers or right brain thinkers. If you're a left brain thinker, you're very logical, you know, verbal, etc. And if you're right brain, you're very creative, and you're not very good at organizational skills. And the reality is we all use both sides of the brain. This is not a left or right brain argument here at all. And we do know that actually from applied neuroscience and education in particular, that's not true. Now the brain does have different areas, but it's always about networks. It's not one area has one job to do. So and one of the things that we've because we've talked an awful lot, we've done a lot of research around this, and we know that there's not even a reading center in the brain.
No, because actually when you think about it, reading and writing are very recent skills for humanity. You know, if you think humans have been around for a very, very, very long time, and there isn't a part in the brain really that's for reading and writing, where we're using the bits of the brain that were for, you know, recognition, for problem solving, for object work, all those sorts of things. So there's different networks that have with evolution have developed in the brain. And of course, humanity has always needed a whole lot of different ways of thinking about things. You know, the person who invented fire or invented the wheel, you know, probably wasn't writing, you know, copious essays on whatever. Oh yeah, wonderful. So this is the in and the outer box things, because throughout time we've needed different types of brain, because you need a species to survive needs all sorts of different ways of thinking and ways of doing and ways of tackling problems and ways of being even. And so over time, really, we've become very streamlined, haven't we? Particularly with the literacy, you know, what the needs of the kind of the Industrial Revolution and the needs of the 19th century and the 20th century. And in fact, interesting, I sometimes think, gosh, you know, a teacher from, you know, 100, 150 years ago, actually things haven't changed that much in the classroom. You know, we're still imparting a body of knowledge, and that body of knowledge has been decided by whoever, society, culture, whatever, and we're imparting that body of knowledge, and then the students have to regurgitate it, and when we've got a very sort of quite limited set of skills that we're focusing on, and obviously literacy is a huge one, and maths. And so that's what schools are doing, and that's really what they were doing, you know, 100, 150 years ago. We've got technology, but in fact it hasn't really changed that much.
Well, it's obviously we are now in a situation where without technology there would be no education at all going on, because now we're no longer in school buildings. And so I think this is going to be, you know, the internet was always seen as the biggest, possibly the biggest disruptor to the education, the current education processes. I won't say system, because system is the students, not the people above them. And this really is a massive opportunity for exactly what we're showing here on this diagram, which
I think so.
This was for us quite a big light bulb moment, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, because out of the box thinking is very much revered in the world of technology and science. And
yes, if you look at
whatever it is,
Google, Disney, you know, Dyson, and people who are going to be the real movers and shakers, the thinkers, the creators. Absolutely, you need these people with this, you know, highly developed creative networks in the brain who can really think.
And I mean, quite interestingly, the stats in terms of people with dyslexia is that 60% of the world's entrepreneurs are dyslexic. Well, why? Because an entrepreneur is someone who can see a solution that doesn't exist currently. They can see things differently, and they see a problem, they see a solution, and it's not the same as the way it's already been done. So they go out and they just develop their own businesses as a result. And about 40% of the world's millionaires are also dyslexic. So I don't know, I'd quite like to be dyslexic, to be honest. That would be fantastic if I could, you know. But the point that we would like to make is that just as those with dyslexia can learn how to control and use their mental imagery for things that are quite boring words, two-dimensional, flat, they're not supposed to move, etc., you know, in terms of spelling and reading, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the use of language necessarily, but just having those very basic skills which are essentially in the box thinking. So this is what's measured at school, isn't it?
Because it, you know, it's absolutely great if you're going to be a Richard Branson or an Einstein, but actually, you know, not all of us are going to be like that.
No, absolutely.
You know, and so therefore, you know, it's fantastic to have this ability to be out of the box neurodivergent thinker, and learn in that way. But actually, that, you know, realistically in the world today, there are some basic skills that you need.
Yes, being able to follow procedures, being able to, you know, there's so much, you know, health and safety rules. There are so many, you know, if you want to become, you know, ISO, whatever it is, 9000, you know, certified, you have processes and procedures that must be followed in a particular order, in a particular way. And a lot of people get, you know, who are only out of the box thinkers, who find the in the box skills very, very difficult, will struggle with that. And it's not because they can't do it, it's because their brain is so used to thinking in this kind of very big picture, you know, different perspective, kind of big perspective, you know, very, very visual way. Is that actually you can train that brain to do the things in the box. It might not be as interesting, but they are pretty important too. And there's no need for people to be struggling at school if both of these approaches are actually used. And we know, we did a lot of research last summer, and we were looking at what are the skills for the 21st century. What is actually, school is meant to prepare people for what they'll be doing later in life. Of course, we now know that, I have 2 young children, and by the time they leave university, certainly jobs that exist now will no longer exist. They'll be obsolete, and jobs will exist that we can't even think of at the moment. So the question is, of course, how do we prepare our children, for post-education? How do we prepare them for the working world and life in general, if really the same processes of memorizing, regurgitating, following procedures is the one that's seen as really the main skills, at school? That's how we succeed at school.
Yes, my brain is just going off it, because I do see this as an opportunity, this moment in time, because there has to be a big shift away from this. And because, I mean, really it is quite difficult, because we were exploring these different networks in the brain, weren't we? And we were thinking about creativity. What is creativity? Can we actually define it and pin it down and think what it is? And there are 3 main networks in the brain. One's called the default network, which is that sort of dreamlike state, that creative state that artists will go into, or when you're sort of sitting in a field building a daisy chain, or you're reflecting on yourself and you're going inwards. It's that kind of dream state there. And you've got the other one, which is the salience network, which is this really important to me? Sorry if you can hear my dog barking. The postage is around.
I knew your dog was going to get involved somewhere today.
Right, so you can't keep him down. And there's that part of the brain which is thinking, is this important to me? Do I really, is this really important to me and salient? And then there's the executive function, and a lot of talk nowadays is around the executive function. That's the bit that decides, where am I going to put my attention?
Yeah.
What am I going to be focusing on at this moment in time? And of course, what we're saying is, if people can't do that, then we say that they've got an attention deficit sort of disability, and there's a deficit and executive function malfunction. And it is right, because often those 3 networks don't work particularly well together. But people who are very creative and also very successful, actually they do get those networks working together. And that is the secret, if you like, of getting this, what can we say, that we can develop both of these in the box and out of the box, because they're both really important.
Yeah, and I think from my own personal experience, I was a really good in-the-box thinker at school. So I could, and I was great at cramming. I was great at actually, learning something a few minutes before a test and then regurgitating it and then promptly forgetting it, or the night before or whatever, So I had that kind of good short-term, long-term memory, if you know what I mean. So it wasn't short-term, because that's only about 15 to 30 seconds, but kind of more sort of surface learning. I didn't necessarily need to fully understand it, but I could recognize when a question was asked, oh, I know what kind of matches that, but I didn't necessarily really understand the concepts at a really deep level. And until I kind of got older. And then once I kind of got older and I realized, actually, I need to really understand things to be able to remember them. It's not enough to just learn something at a surface level, because then it's just gone. It's not seen as that massively important by my brain to be able to really take up space. Actually, it was through, meeting Olive and talking to Olive and trying to actually follow sometimes her train of thought, because she's amazing. She'll just, we'll be talking about something, and her brain, because it is one of those amazing kind of, dyslexic brains where she can really see things from a different angle, was that she would go to this big picture thinking and suddenly see a solution, and I'd still be left inside the box.
Oh,
so,
me, yeah.
And sometimes it would take me a few months, if not even a year, to catch up with the solution. And the reality was that I could do that out of the box, big picture thinking too, as long as I actually train my brain. So this actually works both ways, in that there is really a better brain. There's not like, well, it's what are you doing? What's it for? And actually, our brains are so plastic. We can change, we can program ourselves. We can develop new strategies, as long as we're shown how, that can both. Some people will be more natural in the box thinkers. Exactly. They like the kind of procedure. They like things to be, boxed off. They like to be able to tick the box. They like to be able to know that it's right.
Absolutely. That's me. I'm a plodder. I'm a kind of real kind of plod from one thing to another, and I get there in the end, but it's quite a, as you can see with the way I speak, you know, it's going to, I don't need time to think and process, and yeah, I'm quite safe in my box, and it takes me a long time to struggle with new ideas, and that's it. And I think there was a wonderful thing through NLP, and also particularly through Olive, is to open up that out of the box, that bigger thinking, that more creative part of myself. And okay, I'm not going to start painting, you know, Picasso type pictures, but I could be a little bit more creative and a little bit more taking more risks.
Yes, absolutely. And it is about taking risks. And,
yeah.
you know, and this is in every walk of life, whether it's in, I mean, currently, you know, we are going to need some really big out of the box thinkers to solve
yes.
the world's problems that we're all experiencing at the moment, because the normal protocols and the normal in the box thinking is not working. So, you know, just going, well, this has worked in the past, so let's just keep going and let's find a solution that matches things that have worked in the past. Actually, the reality is out of the box, creative. You know, we need a different way of seeing things, because there is always a solution. If there's a box, there's always something outside of it.
The Einstein quote was, you can't solve a problem at the same level of thinking that created it. And of course,
absolutely,
the problems that we're seeing in the world today, you know, have been created, you know, with one type of thinking, one way of thinking, and in order to solve them, we're going to need a whole new way of thinking, of being. And I do sense that there is a huge shift, a huge change going on. And I would like this to really transform classrooms and education. There is a different way of doing these things. We can give children more, you know, building daisy chain time. We need to develop that side of things, that reflective side, that creative side, and we need to find an effective way to make sure that people who can do that naturally can actually get those basic skills.
Yeah, because reading and spelling
they're fundamental. They're fundamental
skills. They're still really, really important
in our society today. Yeah.
And to the best, you know, and I know people talk a lot about assistive technology, and there was even a discussion going on recently on a Facebook group, and it was about dyscalculia, and he was saying, you know, how do people learn their times tables? And there was a lot of responses which like, don't worry about it, use a calculator, just have a chart.
Oh, I know.
The problem with that, of course, is that then everything, if you don't have those basic skills and those basic maths facts down, so that they are very easy to remember and very quick, you're not having to calculate those. As soon as you start putting anything above that, maths becomes incredibly difficult. Exactly. And it's the same with spelling and reading. You know, if you don't know which is the right word to use, and I've seen this with clients, you know, there's homophones, words that are spelled the same, spelled differently, but have sound the same, different meanings. You know, if you're writing a CV, if you're writing an email to somebody and you're using the wrong words, there is still a perception, well, what's wrong with this? You know, it's not Definitely. Right. That's okay, but this is all part of it. So those things Definitely. Are actually, if you know how, which is what we teach, it's very, very easy. And one of the things we talked a lot about was also the size of the box, exactly as you just said. Oh, yeah. We were saying, what's really going on? You know, in you know, even though this kind of, you know, content delivery on a conveyor belt kind of type system at school, so you're this age, therefore you need this content.
Yes.
Move along, you get more content depending on your age and everything else. But, you know, when budgets are cut, what are the first things that go? Anything that is not deemed to be a real in the box, you know, subject, real academic subject. So if it's music or art or drama or even playtime, that has been time has been squeezed.
Yes.
You know, that box is getting smaller because time is taken out.
It really is. And of course, with the assessment system that we have, you know, if it isn't assessed, then it isn't valued. You know, and I know how the time that was spent on, you know, English and maths and science, and science has sort of dropped off. It's interesting, science has dropped off the assessment
really?
agenda. So, yeah, they're not formally assessed in science at age 11, and so that had a huge effect in primary school. But yes, that it's become narrower and narrower and narrower. We've seen that narrowing of the curriculum, and I really do believe that, you know, looking forward, humans are not going to be working in the same way at all. We're not going to be, you know, that we haven't got that kind of, you know, industrial or even post-industrial environment where you can have people in large offices, you know, all in the typing pool or on the factory floor, or it's going to be very different for humans. And I think humans need to think, what is special about that? And of course, it's always out of the box things which are so special, you know, making music together, singing together. And we've seen that with the COVID lockdowns, haven't we?
Oh, we have seen some incredible,
an explosion of creativity and people doing all sorts of amazing things.
Those are the people who have time, but then there are the other side of people who have actually their workload has doubled or tripled.
Exactly.
Two parents working, trying to work full time from home with their children and do their schooling, and the housework and the cooking and you know, so for some people this has actually become a complete and utter nightmare.
Yes.
Because they have less time, and it really is about time. Time is not something that you know, it's precious, and if we just constantly fill it with things, we are really restricting ourselves in terms of out of the box thinking. I mean, there's a wonderful educator, Guy Claxton, and he wrote a book called Hair Brain Tortoise Mind.
Yeah.
And I love that book because it talks about creativity being, the brain has to have time to meander and to wander. And as you said, it was that. And I love the fact that that's our default position. That's default. We actually, default wise, we are creative. We're born creative.
Yeah.
It's educated out of us for most of us.
I know, I hate to say it after 40 years, but I have seen it.
But I even see with my own children, you know, as they've got older, they've become more fearful of, you know, trying things in case they're wrong. Even with my encouragement and everything else, it doesn't matter because it's really their judgment is coming from school. So we've got here on our diagram, we've got neurotypical and neurodivergent, and we don't say that as a label for people. We talk it about as a way of thinking and learning, don't we?
Absolutely, because we need all types of brain, and all of them need to be valued. And I think for me, teaching needs to be thinking, how can we really develop each brain? How can we really help people understand how their brain is working, how they're thinking, how they're learning, you know, how they're different, what are their strengths, really explore their strengths, the strengths that they've got in the box and the strengths that they've got out of the box, and these both need to be honored.
Yeah, and it's about giving people choice, isn't it?
Yes.
Because, you know, at the end of the day, you may just go, do you know what, out of the box thinking is just too difficult for me.
Yeah.
You know, and we need every type of thinker, because we need a team of people. Some people will absolutely love in the box thinking, following procedures, and that's fantastic. And people always really need to play to their strengths, because then life is easier rather than always going against it. But as long as they have choice, as long as they are shown strategies, that if they're an in-the-box thinker, you know, where their thinking and learning matches typically the way that things are being taught at school, that the approach is very neurotypical. We have, you know, the bell-shaped curve. We've got this teaching to the middle, essentially, people who are, you know, the majority of people seem to sort of, you know, learn and think this way. And the reality, of course, is that there are people who are way more comfortable as out-of-the-box thinkers. They love being creative. They love, you know, and I think it's quite interesting for me just personally, because once this was turned on as a strategy, well, you know what my brain is like, isn't it? It really, you actually have to go, can you get in the box, please? Because there are things that you need to do first. And I just love that kind of, you know, let my brain go off on all these different directions. But I do need to have that kind of more, you know, structured thinking as well to actually produce something. Because otherwise it just ends up being a dream or something, you know. So that ability, some people have this incredible ability to actually do both. And the reality is it's all down to strategies. So we just want to talk a little bit about a definition as well, don't we? Sorry. Yeah. So this is our approach, isn't it? So neurodiversity is seen as being the fact that there's a whole range of different thinking. You know, everyone's brain is actually different. You might have people who appear to you know, think and learn the same way, but even within that group, they will be neurodiversity. There'll be some people whose strengths are maths or art or, you know, science or, you know, English or whatever it is. So that everyone's brain, there is no normal.
Yes, I mean, the norms are set by society, isn't it, where the vast majority are. So that's where you get the neurotypical thing, and if you fit into that, great. If you don't, there's something wrong with you, and we want to get away from that way of thinking, don't we?
We really do.
Because the neurotypical is only neurotypical for a particular society, for a particular cultural and societal norm, if you like. They're the norms that we're being measured by. But there isn't really any typical, because every single brain is different. So the definition is that we see dyslexia, and in fact, learning differences in general, not as learning disabilities, not as a learning disability, but rather as an expression of neurodiversity, pointing to a discrepancy between how a person is taught and how they learn. And that's what we came up with, because certainly I know from my experience, the pressures on teachers are enormous. We have to meet targets, we have that testing regime there, we have the assessments, and the pressures are absolutely huge on teachers. And so the pressure is to teach, as you say, to that. I mean, obviously we're not teaching to the middle, you're differentiating, you're teaching to the most able and to the lesser, but you're within a certain parameter, aren't you? You're within that box. And what we really want to do is to get to more a coaching model, don't we, where we can really help each child really understand their brains, their strengths, the bits that they need to work on, and how can we coach each individual to do the best that they can.
And actually in Finland, I mean, they actually have that as an approach, don't they? They have the classroom teaching as a whole, and then the teacher does go around to every student to coach them as well. There is actually, this exists. This is not a daydream of ours, in terms of it's out of the realms of possibility.
And of course, teachers would say, well, that's what we do. We teach the main lesson, and then we know that we can give extension materials for the more able, for the children who've got that particular subject, and then we go around and we support the other ones. But what we're talking about is something a little bit beyond that, isn't it?
But also, time again, in terms of the pressures that teachers are under.
Oh, the pressures are so huge.
Standardized testing. I mean, I always think it's quite ironic that we teach children that they're unique and they're special in their own way, and then we have a standardized test. Mm-hmm. So and I get we have to see if they are meeting the basic standards of spelling, reading, maths, that these are very, very, very important skills to be able to master, but they're also not the only things.
No, and I think, it's this is why I love our chats, because we kind of give ourselves permission for blue sky thinking, don't we? We give ourselves permission for out of the box thinking. I think probably you felt my tension on the call today, because part of me wants to go, let's fly free, Ted Robbins, let's be creative, and then there's my in the box, come on, there's an education system and there's a structure, and you've got teachers who are struggling with 30 children in a class. So there is that tension. I feel it within me as an educator, and I think we feel it as and we certainly feel it as a parent, because you see yourself having struggled maybe with these basic skills, and all the extra problems that creates in terms of low self-esteem, not wanting to take risks, hiding, and some of the complex strategies that children and adults I've seen have come to get around.
Yeah, amazing, but really incredible.
Incredible strategies. Incredible.
I have a friend who's dyslexic, and she was saying she only got caught at school because her teacher found her reading the book upside down one day.
Yes.
I just went, that is amazing. So what she had done was she had heard the story, she had memorized the story word for word.
Wow.
Was not reading it, was simply was telling the story from memory, and actually had the book upside down. I mean, that I can't do that. No. That is absolutely amazing, and that ability to the auditory load that has.
How do you do that? How on earth do you do that?
It's remarkable, absolutely. And it's quite interesting. I did a poll recently on a site on Facebook, and it was with adults. And the question was, are you not interested in getting any help because you found a way around? And it was about equal, in terms of answers, that people were like, no, I don't really want any help. I found a way around it. Yes. And I think sometimes there's also a fear of if we, because those strategies are so hard fought for and so kind of, they've worked really hard to get it,
Sure.
is that if you interfere with that, then somehow they're going to lose something. And our kind of guarantee is that absolutely not. This is not about losing anything. This is about gaining. This is gaining a choice. This is gaining the ability to move from big picture thinking into in the box thinking when necessary, and then being able, because if you don't know which is the right word to use, I mean, I had this was a student who was studying.
Oh, I think Sarah's frozen for a moment. So I'm not quite sure if you can still see me and hear me, yep. But Sarah's, are you back now, Sarah? You froze for a moment.
Okay, it's just my unstable internet that it tends to be a bit of a thing. But I remember him telling me that, so I was saying to him, okay, how does your dyslexia manifest? And for him, it was spelling. It was right. And he said, but it's the right, he said, I know the word. He said, if I could verbally answer my questions in my exams, he said, I would outtalk everybody. And he had this amazing ability to create these really complex matrices of really complex ideas. I mean, incredible, amazing brain, of course. And but he said when he would go to write the answers, he would know which word he wanted to use, but he couldn't spell it. And then he would struggle for a couple of minutes trying to figure out what was the right spelling, realize he couldn't do it. He'd change the word, and then he'd have to change the whole sentence or the whole paragraph to incorporate the new word. So it was absolutely holding him back. That inability to know the right word and the right spelling was a handicap, because it was not demonstrating actually his knowledge. And so the good news, of course, is that he worked with me. We actually had a whole day, because I did some other kind of learning strategies and revision strategies. And he contacted me afterwards, and he got a 2-1 from Trinity. And he just said,
fantastic.
And he'd had lots and lots and lots of help throughout the years. His mum was fantastic. She had really helped him with his self-esteem and everything else. But when he understood that actually, one of the things we discovered was he always had too many windows open inside his brain. So he would keep switching from one idea to the other. So I helped him to develop a right strategy for him to control his thinking a little bit more. So he wasn't so distracted all over the place with different ideas. In actual fact, what he did was when he was typing, he would have literally different windows open. And if an idea popped up in one thing, he would go into that window, type it up, and then come back to the main one. So he was able to use that incredible talent, but in a much more, again, structured way. We can't function with all these different things going on if we're trying to go from A to B, and we're constantly going to Z and Y and and everything else. It's very, very difficult to produce something.
Yes, because organization often you see that in children's or adults writing, because the ideas have come in such a way that they haven't been sorted and sequenced, and so it is like a scattergun sort of. So trying to sort that out, but that's what's so difficult and so really heartbreaking, I think, as an educator, because you haven't got the time and the tools to do that, because we know that you can really help people in that way.
Absolutely.
I
think you've hit the nail on the head there, Paula, which is it's about the tools. And our big dream really is that teachers in teacher training colleges are taught this process and taught how to coach children, because it's not just about teaching, it's very much more now about learning. How do you really help children to think and learn, and you have to understand what that actually entails. And I know from talking to teachers even recently gone through teacher training college, there isn't an awful lot around actual how people learn. It is a lot of it around teaching.
And it's getting the delivery right. And certainly in the UK with the national curriculum, it's very much, this is the script, and you deliver, and if you've delivered some, and there's just this mismatch between thinking that you're really helping the child learn and really having that, we talked about it last week, that forensic approach of really finding out how does that brain operate, how does that brain fire the different parts of it, how does that brain form the networks, and then how can we really move that so that it can fire in different ways.
Because once children have the right strategies, then you can actually keep teaching.
Yes.
This is the whole
thing. It makes it so much easier. Yeah.
It's easier for everybody. Children are learning better. Teachers are not struggling to understand, well, what's going on for that child. You know, their hands are not so tied then in terms of it has to be one approach, that they have a toolbox. And we're always talking about giving teachers and parents, you know, and children really a toolbox. It's like, which is the right tool to use, you know, at the right time. Instead of it just being, well, let's just use the sledgehammer. That's going to work. It's going to work on everything, you know.
We'll keep going. We'll keep going. It hasn't worked for 5 years. We'll still keep hammering away.
Maybe now is our time, Paula. Maybe now, with so many people, you know, our parents having to become teachers, and that's again why we decided to give the course for free, the online course for parents for free, because we just want to help. We want to help people understand that there's so much more going on between the ears than what we can see. And again, you do definitely need that friends approach. So we're coming kind of towards the end of our
That's right. And I think just to reassure people that we have on this guy, I'm aware that we've gone off onto a bit of sort of esoteric, non-practical kind of flights of fancy, but the course is very practical, very down to earth, and will give you those fundamental tools to help your children.
Absolutely. We just wanted to, I suppose, explain, where are we coming from?
Yes.
You know, why is it different? Because everyone's saying, no, ours is different, and the reality is we still haven't seen anything really that does what our course does, which is that forensic approach, which is really understanding what's going on. It's not a program. It's not like this week you're going to do this and next week you're going to do that. It is purely about teaching the basic in the box thinking skills, the skill, as opposed to the content. It's how do you learn to spell? How do you then, you know, learn to recognize words when you're reading? And we're only doing the parents course is just spelling, reading and handwriting, but of course we cover in our one-to-ones, and in the teachers course we cover maths and science, and you know, a lot. The teachers one is a lot more extensive, but we don't want to overload people any more than they're overloaded with what they've got to do. So it is very, very simple, and it's really interesting and it's fun. I love it. I love seeing kids. You know, often when their parents bring them, they're terrified when they walk into my office. And I just want to tell a couple of little stories before we leave. So 2 children recently, one super smart little chap, and he said to me at the beginning of the session, he said, by the way, just so you know, I'm going to be rating you out of 5 stars, which I thought was fantastic. His mum was horrified. I said, no, that's absolutely, I want his feedback. And at the end of the first session, I said, so how many stars do I get? He said, you get the 5. Yeah, okay. Which I thought was amazing. And I think it was actually the same week at a little girl, just amazing kids. And she just said to me at the end, she said, by the way, you're really good with kids. So I don't know if my own kids would agree with that, but thank you. But I mean, she was 8, you know, and just giving me
bless her.
And she said, can I come and see you even when I don't need to do any more?
Lovely.
You know, and that to me just shows how much fun they have and how great they feel when they have these skills. This is not to do with me as a person. I know that. You know, it is.
Oh, I don't know, something.
Well, maybe a little bit, but it's more because, you know, I know and you know there's so much more to people than meets the eye, and certainly more to people than meets the label.
Oh, I love that phrase. So much more to people than meets the label. Yeah.
Paula, we could talk all day, couldn't we? Well,
oh my goodness, yes.
But we've come to the end of our hour. Really hope that people have enjoyed this. Any questions, please post them underneath the video. We're happy to answer. You can private message us as well on the Facebook group. And yep, the course is there. It's still free while we're in this horrible lockdown situation and kids are not at school. So it'll be free really till September by the looks of it. But please go ahead, sign it up, share it with people, and give us feedback. We'd love to know how you're getting on.
We'd love to hear.
Paula, have a fantastic day.
Oh, you too, Sara. Great to catch up.
We will talk later.
Indeed. Cheerio.